that I am a Brazilian physicist who is currently in Brazil right now on my vacation. So my internet here is not the best thing I've ever seen. So like I am anticipating some type of problem at some point. Just be patient. I promise any problem will be solved as soon as my internet allows me. So I am sorry for that. Well, so I guess the first thing I want to say is that the title of this presentation is very bold and wild, right? I am not 100% sure that by the end of the presentation, we will know. I don't think by the end of this project, I will be able to say, oh, this is why and how they stay. But we're going to have some clues. So I am just telling you this right now. I am not giving any answers, but we have some clues, and the clues that we have, I'm going to share with you. Okay. Everything was working fine until 2 seconds ago, and now I am unable to pass the screen. Here. Okay. So I just want to start making clear some stuff about myself that maybe will help you to understand why I chose the things that I chose to talk about in this presentation. And considering that I am one of the people who are both interviewing participants and also coding the interviews, can give some ideas of how participants interact with me. I'm going to talk about the research that we are doing in details in a few moments. But at this point, I think it's important to mention that we do interview with participants, and any interview is a two-way situation, right? So I am understanding something about the participants, and the participants are also reading me as they talk to me. As you can probably say by now, I have a very heavy accent. I have been in the US for 1.5 years, and I have a pretty heavy accent. So anyone who talks with me for 2 minutes can say for sure that I am not from the US. Since you are interviewing American physicists who work in the US, most part of people we are interviewing are from this background. They are American physicists. So that probably shapes something about how these people talk to me and see me. Not necessarily when I open my mouth, people know I am Brazilian, but they can say that I am not an American citizen. And for some reason, Portuguese and Spanish sounds alike. So people usually assume that I am Latin American, and they are correct. They just usually assume that I speak Spanish. That's incorrect. I speak Portuguese. I am an immigrant. What makes some participants who are also immigrants in our research have some sort of different connection with me, it seems like. And that's a very interesting thing, because there are parts of my identity and anyone's identity that we can keep to ourselves. And there are parts that we cannot disguise. It's just evident. So the fact that I am a person who presents as a woman, also because I use the pronouns she, her on my everything, is something that people usually notice pretty quickly. They also understand that I'm not from the US. They understand that I am an immigrant. They don't know that I am pansexual. So that's a very interesting thing, because when I'm talking to women, either they are also part of the LGBT community or not, they usually have some sort of connection with me, and they suppose that I understand their experiences of being a woman in physics. They usually, if they are also part of the LGBT community, don't expect me, because they cannot read that in me immediately, that I am also familiar with other type of challenges that they face as LGBT physicists. And we're going to discuss that more in detail later. A very random fact is that I'm also a social scientist. And maybe because of that, when I do an interview, for example, I try to pay attention to some sort of stuff, such as how people behave, their tones, how they position their bodies, that give me some type of understanding of what's happening beyond the spoken language. So that's a thing that we usually do in social sciences, and that I try to bring to this research in physics education. And I am also a physicist, because I am very random. As mentioned before, I'm going to discuss specifically our current research about the social network of women and LGBT physicists. But I want to give some background, because I work at the University of Utah. The PI of our group is Ramon, who is one of the people who did this very interesting work, and that most of you are probably familiar with if you are interested in LGBT topics in physics. And from this background, from this climate report that came up a few years ago, we have a pretty good idea, just a moment. We have a pretty good idea of how these physicists who self-identify as LGBT look like. Just to give a brief introduction, although there were like 1,000 people who received the surveys, by the end of the responses that they had were something around 300 something answers that could be used. And this is how those people looked like 7 years ago. I'm a physicist, but I cannot do arithmetics. So 7 years ago, this is how like that looks like. So as we can see, we have in this specific document a very large amount of cisgender people. And we are going to talk about terminology soon. In our research, and that's the thing that is very interesting to us, we have 100 physicists, and from these 100 physicists, 18 are either non-binary or trans. So that's something that we think is interesting to us, because we have a very good representation of this person, like of this part of the physics population, the physicist population, and we discussed that in details. And we believe that having 18 out of 100 people who participate in our research being trans or non-binary is something that make us have data on a specific part of the population that are not always so like well understood, also because of these numbers that you are seeing right here, right? Like, can you see my, can you see where I'm pointing at?
Yes, we can see your mouse, Camilla.
Okay, so as you can see here, from these numbers, it's kind of easy to understand that the population that we got, like 80%, 18 people, in this case, 18% of people who are in this population is a very interesting data. One of the things that come as a result of this, like as an understanding of what is written here and what's written in papers talking about this climate report, is that not having experiences with exclusion, not having experience of harassment is a good thing. However, being included is more important, have a greater impact than not being excluded, if that makes sense. So there's a difference between experiencing inclusion and not experiencing exclusion. The first one, when you feel like you are part of a community and you are included in that community, is a very good predictor of whether or not people are going to stay, and if they are being out to their coworkers, to their colleagues, and that's something that we kind of we take into consideration when we do this research that I'm talking about soon, is that having experience of inclusion is something that we have to pay attention, not only not experiencing exclusion and harassment. I believe most people here are familiar with the terminology, but I decided to put some of this here just to have some common ground as I'm going to talk about, I'm going to use this terminology. So I talked like 2 seconds ago about the transgender people that participated in our study, and also about the non-binary folks. So basically, right now in our group, when we talk about being trans in our research, everyone who identified as trans, everybody who identified as non-binary, and men or women. Because people, just to make sure everyone understands, they could self-identify and they could use whatever words they preferred. So we didn't have check boxes. People could just like answer the way they wanted to answer. So most people answered non-binary and men or women. So just to give you an idea that when we talk about transgender, we are talking about someone in our research, and that's the terminology that we are using, that identifies as something that is not the gender assigned to them at birth. And when we talk about non-binary, we are talking about someone who do not necessarily fall under the category of men and women. That's what we expect. But people chose to say that they were non-binary and something also men and women or women. So that's what we had as a result. Okay, so we didn't have check boxes. People just decided to write that in their open responses, in an open answer. LGBT, acknowledged for lesbian, gays, bisexual, transsexuals, and everything else that is not those in the plus. So it's at least in Brazil right now, we have like 10 different letters. I always forget what the 10 of them mean, but the important thing is this was supposed to be a plus, not a P, okay? I am sorry, it's a typo. So everyone who is part of this community, but is not represented in one of the 4 letters. Being out, and this is an important thing in our research, is you can be out because you decided to be out. So like disclose to your colleagues, coworkers, family, whatever, your community, that you are part of the LGBT community, but someone can also be outed. So, and that happened to some of our participants. So people who did not feel prepared to talk about that in their workplaces or in their graduate programs, but they were outed by others, and the impact that it has in their experiences. So experience of harassment because they did not feel prepared. And most of the times they were correct in not wanting to be out, and they didn't have a good experience with people from their departments, and they were not included or respected in their identities. So you can be out because you decide to, and you can be outed, what can be pretty dangerous for someone. And when we talk about race and identity, ethnicity, basically in our study, people could, like, there was one answer about race and another one about ethnicity, and people usually answered just like without much details and without making clear distinctions between both. So many people, they would say they are white and white, or African American, and they would not make any type of distinction, and that's it. So that, but like for this specific report and for the papers that came out after this report, race is a social construction, and ethnicity has to do with everything that is culturally shared because you belong to an ethnicity. So the fact that I am Brazilian and I'm also Jewish makes me have some sort of shared identity and shared history with other people who are either or both Brazilians and Jewish, and that's what we are talking about here. But as I said, people didn't usually do this distinction, make this distinction. The findings from this report, that is our background, are multiple, but here are some that I find is specifically important for our discussion. So first of them, isolation is a common theme for LGBT physicists. So that impacts their careers, and that's the whole premise of the work we are doing, because they don't find mentorship, or they have a harder time finding mentorship. Their networks can be somehow shorter or weaker or different in general than the networks from people who are not in this community. That is especially true in the case of our research for participants who identify as trans, mostly because people before transition, they don't feel like people see them for who they are, so they prefer not to be seen. That's the experience of most our participants who are transgender. So before transitioning, they didn't want to speak in public, or they didn't want to make connections with people, because after transitioning, they would be, in their view, forever connected to their dead name, to the dead identity, to the dead face, to the dead everything that they wanted to change in the future. So sometimes they already knew they were trans, but they didn't have transition by the time they were invited to like do a public speech, for example, and then they would deny it because they didn't want to be seen as that person that people would be seeing them at that moment. And that's a very important impact. If you think about it, it's part of our career in academia, and I'm pretty sure in government as well, but I'm pretty sure to a certain extent in industry. Those are the 3 sectors that we are researching, to talk to others. So if you cannot speak to others because your networks are weak, that makes your networks even weaker. And that can have an impact if you want to change jobs, or if you want to pursue a different career or ask for a promotion. Anything that involves being connected to people is harmed by this. So this is kind of something that we are examining, and I will talk about that very soon. The fact that physicists have different experiences according to like which letter they represent. So again, from both the data from this report specifically and from what we are seeing in our research, the physicists who identify as transgender, they experience like a much more close environment to them and other experience of exclusion compared, for example, to people who are gay or lesbians. That is also, there is also a difference between people who are out or not. So there's this expectation that like when we talk about LGBT, we cannot talk about this as a single thing because different people in this community have very different experiences according to the identities that people can capture from them, can understand that they have. And another thing that is very important, and I feel like this is a huge thing considering that we are in the Pride Month, is that LGBT physicists sometimes have a hard time finding allies. And it's important to make a difference between someone who is an ally because they have a sticker on something or because they're like, go gay, and those who are going to use their position of privilege to change the situation, to change the system, and to speak up for people who are marginalized in that institution. So it can be sometimes easier to find people who identify as allies, like verbally, or as I said, I gave this example because apparently that was a thing on Twitter a few months ago about the stickers, and people who are going to use their privileges for something. And that's the thing that people have a hard time finding. People who are going to use that to mitigate the situation of marginalization, okay? The situations that these people go through for being LGBT. Well, now I'm going to talk specifically about our current study. So I want to start talking about our methodology. So we are using a qualitative approach to egocentric social network analysis that I will probably talk about just as SNA from now on, because that's how we call it, just SNA. And we are doing semi-structured interviews. These semi-structured interviews, they are conducted for like an hour. We have 3 people interviewing. And during this interview, we ask questions about people's current job, past jobs, their experiences transitioning from one job to the other, if they had people connecting them to positions. Remember that we want to understand how people connect themselves to others and how / if those networks help them to navigate their careers. So this is the type of question that we ask. And as we ask those questions, we ask participants to fill here the names of people or groups that they are talking to us about. So groups here, it can be anything from a department to a group for women in science or LGBT people in science or immigrants in science, people who share different identities, or something completely unrelated, such as a running group or a crafting group, anything that is considered a group that is important for them to navigate, not drop out, and stay in their careers or to change their jobs, anything is considered a group that we want to hear more about. And when it comes to the names, any names of anyone from like family, undergrad, grad school, current job, anything. One thing that is very interesting that appears here is that we use this, so like just to give a brief explanation of what is this. So we have this sociogram, and this star in the center is the participant. And we try to understand how close or how far these people and groups are from these participants. One thing that is very interesting is that we find a difference between the size of networks between LGBT people who identify as men and women and LGBT people who are not men. Okay, and that's an interesting thing. Why? Because we would expect that, okay, so when we are talking about women, we would have similar networks. But those networks are pretty different according to some factors. So the women who are also LGBT, they usually have a network that is much shorter than those who are not in the LGBT community. That's something that we pay attention to. The participants who are women and are also participants of color, they have usually a much bigger, like in the size of the networks is much bigger than the ones who do not identify as participants of color. That's an interesting thing as well. However, if we're talking about participants who are like men, LGBT, sometimes we had sociograms empty, sociograms with one person only during the entire description of the person's career. And that's something that is impactful having a sociogram where we ask questions about people who connected you to jobs, people who provided you support, emotional, material, instrumental support, and you have a sociogram with one person, and we had more than one of those. That's something that is relevant if you think about what that means in terms of career. This is just for the sake of visualization, how the thing that we are doing is like. So instead of having many nodes, so nodes are this, like these are the nodes, okay? Instead of having many nodes, all of them interconnected, and seeing how many connections one node has to others, because that's how usually social network analysis is used in physics education, we are trying to understand how one specific person is connected to others, and if these others that are connected to our participant specifically are connected to each other. So one thing that we see sometimes is that in people's sociogram, we have some nodes that are highly connected to everyone else. So these people are somehow influential, not only for the participant, but in this network that we are seeing, the picture right there, okay? I should probably do one of those. I should have done one of those just to explain what I cannot, of course, show you one of the real ones, but I should have done one just to explain you how that is. I hope it's mainly clear. Let me see. Okay. So the thing that we're trying to do is, as I think it's kind of clear by now, to compare the social networks of people in different situations. So people who are LGBT, people who are women, people who are in the intersection, people who have other minoritized identities on top of those ones, and how they, these minoritized identities talk to each other, right? And so basically that's what we're doing. We're trying to compare this network of different people from different, with different identities and also from different job sectors. So in our research, we are doing, we are interviewing participants. We did, because we already did the 100 interviews. We interviewed people in academia, industry, and government. And there are some interesting differences between people in different sectors that we are going to explore later. I'm trying to change my, I'm sorry. That's interesting. I'm sorry, just a second, because I can see that you are not seeing the transition. Yeah, it worked. Okay. So here is the demographics of our study. So as I said before, we did interview people from academia, government, and industry, and this is how our demographics look like. It was easier to recruit participants from academia than it was from government and industry. There is a huge overlap between people in academia and government, people with joint appointments. So this is how this look like. And we do have more people in academia than in the rest of the sectors, but our goal was having around 30 people in each sector, and we do have that. Although most of the sectors, they have 30 people when we consider intersections, this is what we are aiming at. So we achieved our goal of having at least 30%, 30 people in each sector. This is our participants who are LGBT or women. As we can see, most of our participants are both. And here, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the amount of people who are who identify as trans and non-binary is huge in our research. We have 18% of our participants in that group, and we are looking at these demographics specifically. So we are besides doing the job sector comparison and all of that, we are also looking at what these 18 people have in common. So we are trying to look at them specifically at them. We have 21 participants who are people of color or Latin American or Hispanic. And here in this category, we have like basically 21 people who are born and raised in the US. So we have some immigrants, but most of people in this category are from the US. So this is like we are talking about people who are born in America. So some sort of issues such as those related to visa, a difficult time finding employment because they are immigrants. Most of these 21 participants did not have. And well, so now talking specifically about the current research, I want to talk to you about what make people feel included. So as we said before, it is important to feel included, even more than not feeling excluded. So what makes people feel like they are part of something? What makes them feel included in the institution and in the community? How participants create or join diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. That's an interesting thing, because we could think of the DEI initiatives as something that people join, but if the thing doesn't exist yet, so people feel compelled to create one. And that's one thing that we wanted to understand as well. What makes people think like, no, this is enough is enough, we need to make something about it and start an initiative ourselves now. So what makes people start and create those initiatives? What people consider to be an interesting and effective DI initiative that they want to join. So the fact that you have a DI initiative doesn't mean that it is effective or that people want to join it, or that is a group or discussion that people feel like they are going to have some benefit from it. So what type of initiative people feel like they can be benefited from? Also, what makes a good mentor? Since mentorship and the lack of mentorship is something important, okay, so mentorship is important, but any mentorship, or is that something that people are looking for and that's the thing that they consider to be life-changing for them? Because you can have mentors, people who are mentors, but they're not good mentors. And then maybe they're going to harm your career more than they're going to help. That's a thing that happens. So what is a good mentor? What a good mentor looks like? And also, which are the differences among sectors according to three different topics. So I'm going to discuss three topics and the difference between job sectors regarding those three topics. Starting with what makes participants feel included. So the presence of other marginalized people have an impact even if they don't talk to those people. So a thing that we saw a lot is that you don't have to be friends or even like that other person who share identity with you. But the fact that you see someone else like you and you know that you are not alone have an impact on people. That's an interesting thing because in most departments, we have seen that a lot, women talking about their loneliness. So the fact that they are the only women in their workplace or in their department, for example. And that's an interesting thing because when another woman comes to the environment, even if they do not have any particular type of connection, because not just because someone else is a woman that you have like an immediate connection with that person, that's not how things happen. The fact that now you have someone like you to share, that you know that it shares the same experiences that you have, is something that people consider impactful. And I know that this presentation is specifically about LGBT people. However, as I showed a few slides ago, 43% of our participants are both LGBT and women. So more like it's pretty often when we talk about LGBT participants, we are talking about someone who's also a woman and like have the experience of being a woman appears to be something that they cannot run away from. While the experience of being LGBT, they can decide if they want to disclose this information or not. So when they are sitting in a meeting, for example, everyone is acknowledging that they are women. Not necessarily they are all aware of their other identities. So that's the thing that participants talk a lot about. So the presence of other marginalized people, even if they are not close, that's important. Strong allyship. So as we said before, there is a difference between the allies that they tell you that they are your ally and that after a situation of harassment, after a situation of disrespect happens, they go straight to you and say, hey, I am sorry about the thing, like you can count on me, you can talk to me, but they see the situation, they don't do anything, either about the situation when it's happening, or after that to change something, report the boss or the coworker who did the thing, or give some type of support that can change the environment for the better, that's not like very useful for our participants. So our participants, they talk about this type of people as people who they don't even consider actually allies. So the ally is someone that will do something, that will protect you from situations of exclusion. Oh my God, what's happening? That will protect you from situations of exclusion, and will go with you to talk about what happened, to give some type of reinforcement. And that's the type of allyship that matters. Also, people feel included when they have agency, intellectual, academic, and organizational. The intellectual and academic agency, they are related to people respecting your decision of doing what you feel like. So one thing that some participants talk about is this need, because they are women or gay or a Black American person, an African American person, that they have to talk only about that. And so they should research that, they should do something about that, and that should be the entire like extent of their work when it comes to serving in committees or things like this. And they like to have the possibility of doing things that they want and not having to be to advocate all the time, even though they find that important. So the fact that you acknowledge that it is important to speak up and make your point and participate in DI initiatives, it cannot become a prison for you. That's how our participants talk about this. So they want to have agency and they want to be free to pursue the things that they want without having someone telling them that because of their identities, they should be doing thing ABC. Organizational agency is related to how open an organization, an institution is to incorporate DEI initiatives and to listen and make changes according to what they see is true. So one thing that happens a lot, our participants talk a lot about it, is they talk to their bosses, to the person responsible for their department or institution about racism, sexism, homophobia. And then they listen that that's not really a thing. It's not a thing. Then they do something about it, such as do a survey, like among people who are in the institution, and they find out that it's actually an issue and everyone is experiencing that. Then they feel very happy when, in face of evidence, the people in charge decide to do something about it. So, or let them do something about it, if that's the case. So that's what we are calling organizational agency. Well, moving forward, now we're going to talk about how and why participants create those initiatives. One thing that we see is like very interesting is that when it comes to people in academia, for participants in academia, the DI initiatives, they have more impact for them when they are in the PhD, like doing their PhDs or in undergrad, in the early careers, in the early stages of their careers. So after they already became professors and they are already working in the institution, not as a student anymore, but as like the professors, then those DI initiatives are not so useful for them. And we, at the beginning of our research, we thought that that was something that we're going to see more among people in academia. And it turns out we were correct. So people in industry have a very different experience with that, with the DI initiatives in their institutions. So we are going to talk about that more in details later. But here it's important to talk about white people. I'm so sorry. I am in Brazil, and in Brazil, people are very disrespectful with people's time. Sorry. The important thing is white people create or join a DI initiative. So people create this type of initiatives because they need to build a community. That means they need to know that they are not the only ones, and they need to feel part of a collective. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why people create a DI initiative, to find community. So they organize a Slack channel or gatherings, social gatherings, or lunch or dinner during a meeting, during a professional meeting. And those type of things make them feel like they are part of something. And that's important, not only because they feel happy for being part of something, but also because when you are looking for someone to suggest, like you want to suggest a name for like a conference, to be the speaker at something, or to be like part of something, if you see a job and you're like, oh, I would like to recommend someone for that position, you can only think of people that you know. So if you don't know people, you're probably not going to think of that. So this type of initiative is not only about feeling part of a community, but also knowing people who know you and can somehow make your career progresses faster. This is a thing that especially women talk about. Women talk a lot about it, about the need to be known so that they are going to have a progress in their careers. Also to take action. So people create a DI initiative because things are wrong and things need to be changed. And they cannot change things alone. So like our participants recognize the power of being part of a group. And if you want to take an action, it's easier and more effective to do it if you have a group of people who got your back. And this is one of the reasons why people do it. A thing that is very interesting. Here's the example that I had in my mind when I was talking about people knowing you. So take action in this case is creating a database, so that when people are looking for speakers and people to come to conferences and things like this, they would have a female name to look for. Because due to the fact that physics is a male-dominated field, this is specifically the case for women, is a male-dominated field. When you want to think of a woman to invite, sometimes it's hard because you only know men. So if you have a database with all the name of women that works in a specific field, it makes easier for you to bring those people and make them known, right? This is also the case for LGBT people. So that's an interesting thing. We have, for example, the 500 plus queer physicists. That is a very interesting scientists, not physicists. That is a very good way to see people who work in science and are queer. So when you have this type of groups, it makes easier for you to get in contact and invite people, even if you cannot in your memory find anyone who is in those groups. So that's important. That's action. And people join those type of initiatives for the same reason. However, when you join a DEI initiative, it is a bit tricky because you join an initiative that you believe that can be useful for you. And not every type of DEI initiative is useful for you, as I talk about here. So what type of DI initiatives participants prefer to join and consider to be in fact impactful in their careers? What these initiatives have in common? First of all, they have to have clear goals. So every time a DI initiative do not have a clear goal, they have to be aiming at creating community. So if you don't have a clear goal, so I want to achieve that. So this is an initiative to do that. So this is our like the expected outcome of being a part of that DI initiative, people feel less compelled to be part of it. So are those initiatives that they start, maybe at the beginning they are strong and they have many people coming to it. And as time progresses, these groups or these initiatives are like, it slowly dies. People just drop out because they cannot see how that's going to help them in their goals. And these goals can be get to know people, build community, learn something that they don't know how to do, especially, and this again, especially for women in our case. So one thing that our participants talk a lot about is about practical aspects of their jobs. So participants in our experience, in our research, especially women, they want to learn how to do stuff such as ask for a raise, say no. Like that's a huge thing for participants. Like the ones who identify as women, they say that saying no is a very hard thing to learn how to do. And they want to learn how to say no and believe that that's not going to compromise their careers. So sometimes people are afraid of saying no to invitations, and that make them stop being asked to do stuff or being asked to speak at conferences and things like this. So this is an important thing. Also, salary negotiation. At the beginning of the job and during their careers. So they have a hard time knowing how to do these negotiations. So negotiation skills is something that they want to know more about. And they would join a DI initiative and they would like stick to it if they feel like they are gaining some of those skills. And also leadership. So leadership, in like the way participants frame it, is a thing that there's a lot of focus on if you are in industry. So in industry, there's a lot of initiatives that aim at teaching people how to like be leaders and do the best they can with the resources they have. And this is the thing that they want to learn about, and they would join a DI initiative about that. So about how being a leader, considering the identities that maybe would make your leadership hard for others. Okay, so this is a very important thing. Have an impact beyond making participants talk about the public-facing initiatives. There are those that institutions make to show that they have, oh, my internet connection is unstable. That's great. So the public-facing initiatives, there are those initiatives that institutions make because they want to show that they are trying. So you have, let's say, 5 people who are lesbian, gays, bisexual, transsexual in your institution, and during June, during the Pride Month, you are going to like put their pictures everywhere and talk about those 5 people, and that looks super cool. But then when you go and you look at those institutions, if you have non-binary employee, for example, this person have a problem using bathrooms, or if you have a trans person, the person has a hard time having their names acknowledged. So like that's the difference. So not necessarily the fact that you have those employees and you put their faces and you like make a lot of noise means that those people in that institution are respected. So the DI initiative, they have to go beyond making an institution look good. Also, this is another interesting thing. So we had some participants who say that in the environment they work, like at their workplace, there are a lot of LGBT people, or there are a lot of women. And because of that, they don't feel the need to join any DI initiative because they already feel like they are majority. So they don't need it. And that's an interesting thing as well, because also because these participants say that they don't even know if those initiatives exist, because maybe they don't, because those initiatives would come to solve a problem that would come from the fact that these populations are minority. So if you're not a minority, or if you are like equal or almost there in your workplace, then maybe the participants, that in our case, the participants do not feel the need to join any type of DI initiative, to join or create any type of DI initiative. Some examples that our participants gave of things that would be useful, that they would consider useful, are book clubs or workshops about topics that are related to their careers. So to talk about imposter syndrome, this one is very common, like among everyone, like not only women, but also like lots and lots of participants in general. They say that imposter syndrome is a problem for them. Learning about negotiation skills and a way to develop their leaderships. So if there is a book club or a workshop about that, they would call that a DI initiative, even if it's not something that will keep happening in time, and they would join it. Social gatherings for community building, so that they can know that they're not alone there, because as we said before, this is one of the things that make people feel included. So they feel included by knowing that they are not the only ones. So if you're in a big institution and you are like, there are not so many LGBT people or women there, then maybe a social gathering where the few of them can find themselves and see each other, it's important, because otherwise maybe they're not going to find each other there. And also a thing that is very practical, and people talk a lot about it, is facilitating the process of name change, having a sector of the institution that is responsible for calling journals to inform them that names have to be changed. So if you have a participant, and we have a lot of non-binary and trans participants, they change their names and they don't want to call the journals to talk about that. They don't want to have to deal with that part of bureaucracy, either because they don't feel comfortable or because it takes a lot of their time to do it. For any reason, it's good when the institution have people who are responsible for doing this, and they consider that to be a very useful DI initiatives. And also the bathroom, like having gender neutral bathrooms is important. And that's a thing that participants talk about a lot. Like our non-binary participants talk about that a lot. We didn't have any non-binary participant who did not mention bathroom, either as something that they thought So like the need to fight for those bathrooms, and also to acknowledge that institutions sometimes they just have it even without them asking for it, or they arrive in an institution, the institution already have it, and that's something that they acknowledge as something that make their lives easier and their adaptation to the new workplace easier. Here are some quotes from our participants about DI initiatives. And I want to focus on these 6 ones because we have a lot, but like I want to focus on these ones because they have things that exemplify something that we saw very often. Okay. So one thing that this trans woman told us about is how easy it is to make their institution change things that are very practical and don't change the culture. So if the culture is not going to be touched, the institution sometimes can make a good job. And that's specifically true for people in government. They talk a lot about it. So the gender neutral bathrooms, the name changes, the name in their badges, having emails with like this type of information sent to people in the department, those type of things are easy when you are in government. But anything that touches the culture, that's hard. And like what I'm talking about when I talk about culture here? Culture here is how people think and how people talk. So in practice, like in real life, in like the materiality of things, they change. But the way people treat each other, or the way people think and what to listen to them talking when they are alone in their small groups and they don't know that you are listening, that doesn't change because that's culture. And that's kind of the differentiation that our participants do. This is in government and academia. A thing that is very interesting in academia is that people talk about DI initiatives as a moral imperative. So they do it because they have to do it, even though they don't have many benefits from it. So when you interview people who are working as professors or in academia, not as students, what they usually talk about is why they are part of DI initiatives, not for themselves, but for others. So because the students need it, they are part of it, but they don't have any benefit from it. And not only they don't have a benefit from it, but sometimes it's bad for their careers because that's time that they are using in service. And they usually make more than 20%. Like the participants usually talk about in academia specifically about how they should do 20, 20, 60 or 20, 30, 50. But in practice, they do 100, 100, 100. So 100 service, 100% teaching, and 100% research. But in theory, it should be something for service around 20%. And if you're part of a lot of DI initiatives, that increases your time of service. And because you have a limited time in your day, it decreases your time doing something else that maybe is more valued when you are doing your when you're applying for tenure, right? So if you want to be a tenured professor, you need to show that you are an excellent researcher and an excellent teacher. And service is not that relevant for your case. And because these people, they feel like they have to spend their time with DI, they sometimes have a hard time accomplishing the other things expected from them. So not only they don't benefit from it usually, but they also have, they talk about how that can impact negatively their time research and teaching. For people in the industry, that's a very interesting case as well, because they talk about how DI initiatives can benefit themselves. So they are part of DI initiatives, not because other people need it or because it's a moral imperative, but because they can get something out of it. And that's how things usually go from people in industry. And that doesn't mean that people in the industry are selfish or anything like this, but that they can find initiatives or create initiatives that can benefit them. And they usually join those initiatives. And also they see the time they use with this type of thing as work. So they count that as hours. And that's something that people in academia, for example, they usually do that on top of the hours that they already work weekly. And while people in industry, they know that that's time for work, and they would not volunteer the time for that unless it's something very extraordinary and limited in time. About what makes a people a good mentor. I just found that online, and that's the best representation of what our participants needs in a mentor. I will explain the situation. So our participants talk a lot about how they need someone that they can trust because they want to ask questions that, in their opinion, is kind of stupid, such as, how do I make the printer work? And that's very connected to that. So what a mentor is a resource. So it's someone that can provide you something that you need, a resource. And it's someone that you can trust. Not only trust because you need to trust that this person is giving the best advice possible, but also because when you ask questions, you are being vulnerable. So acknowledging something that you don't know is putting yourself in a position of vulnerability with your mentor. So you need someone that you can trust to say, for example, I don't know how to use a printer. The things that a mentor does, basically, if we can synthesize that, is focus on the mentee. So a person who is mentee oriented is a person that sometimes will keep their advice for themselves if they think that that's not what the mentee needs to hear. So something that would be good for the mentor, not necessarily is what would be good for the mentee. And a good mentor knows this difference and acts accordingly. So the fact that the mentor has to have the mentee's best interest in life in mind is related, for example, to protection. So a few slides ago, I talked about the allyship, having strong allies that do something for you. So a mentor is if you are in a position of fighting sometimes when people would be aggressive towards you because of your identities, you need someone who protects you and who take you away from this type of situation, who blind, like who serve as a shield, people who shield you. So that's the word that people used many times. Someone who can shield you from this type of situations of exclusion and harassment and aggression. And usually people talk about mentors as someone who is senior. And one reason why that is an interesting thing is because sometimes people talk about harassment and like homophobia, racism, and all of that in like their workplaces as something that could be solved by just waiting for all those people to retire. For example, they have this idea that these people are people who are part of another generation where those things were acceptable. And when those people retire or die, the problem would be solved. But that's a problem because if our mentors, if our participants, they need mentorship from people who are senior to them and they need someone who is in the institution longer, then people who are in the institution longer needs to not be the cause of their problems. They have to be part of the solution. So it's not enough to just wait for everyone to retire. And this is a thing that our participants talk a lot about. Participants need someone who know the institution, who knows their career, who have a very well-established career, because those are the people who have advice for you. So if someone is at the same level in their careers or are in the institution at the same time, for the same time that you are, then they will not know more than you. You need someone who knows more than you know. And those people are usually people who are in the institution longer. So this is a thing that I think it's interesting to have in mind. This
Camille,
is
about 5 minutes.
Yes, this is the last slide, actually. So here are the difference between different sectors. So I kind of talked about it during the presentation. This is just like a slide synthesizing everything in one spreadsheet. So what participants are talking about DI initiatives. In academia, they're talking that those initiatives are many times public-facing. They benefit others and usually focus on students, while the professors themselves do not see like an impact of that in their careers, other than saying that that's service and putting in their CVs. It's a more imperative and might even impact negatively people's career. In government, practical changes, they happen and they benefit themselves and others. So people are part of these initiatives because they can have some benefit from it, but also because of others, especially other generations that will come to the institution after they leave. And in industry, they are very career-oriented. So if something is connected to their job, they are joining. If not, they are not joining. And they say that the participants say that in industry, people do anything to avoid a lawsuit. So the reason why they're not going to be homophobic to you or like sexist to your face is because they don't want to be sued. So like that's what drives the DI initiatives and those type of changes, according to our participants. The mentorship process is often very informal in academia, in the sense that you don't have a formal program that you join. You just find people like for affinity. You have affinity with someone, and then those people become your mentors. While in other sectors, there is a more formalized way to find a mentor. And about staying or leaving, we see that people in academia, they usually stay in academia, especially because stability is one of the things that people say is a good thing in academia. So academia has some cons, such as the poor life-work balance, the payment that is not so great, but they have intellectual freedom. They believe that the academia is the place where you can have more intellectual agency, and also you have stability. In government and industry, people live like more. In industry, for example, apparently leaving is expected. So if you stay too long in an institution, that's something that is seen as laziness. Like you were not smart enough or like fast enough to search for something else, and you just stayed in the same institution forever. So this is I'm just posing here the question that I aimed at discussing at the beginning of the presentation, and now it's the let's talk moment. Also, here is the QR code for our group in case anyone wants to see what we are doing. I guess that's it.
Thank you, Camilla. Let me go ahead and stop recording.